All the great discussion occurring about all sorts of colorful things. I'm going to go ahead and call to order this afternoon's work session, the third or fourth work session related to the 23-24 budget.
This week.
Feels like it. Thank you all so much for being here today. I've asked our county attorney, Brian Applegate, if he would lead us in the pledge.
Please join me in honoring our great nation. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We had asked the county manager and his team to work with our constitutional officers on some follow-up questions that we had related to their budget presentations, and so I'll turn it over to Mr. Gray to tee us up for this afternoon.
Thank you, Madam Chairman and Commissioners. But there's no donuts or popcorn today.
I threatened to bring the margarita machine,
we got
then I thought,
we got the chocolate. And I know we have worn you out for the last couple of days, so hopefully this won't be all afternoon. But as we discussed yesterday, the agenda for today that is in front of you, that we're going to do is the follow-up to some questions that you all had from the constitutional officers. But Tim ensures that I stay on script, so I got to make sure I do that with him. So today we'll follow up on some of the questions that came out of our May 16 work session with the constitutional officers. We've received budget detail from all of the agencies who presented in May, so they all did respond to us. In addition, there were 17 requests for information related to the presentations that were heard. That information has been given to the board, and we will go over that today. We will also go over the clerk's Article 5 report, and then close out with just a quick discussion on the upcoming budget calendar. Before I turn it over to Tim, Jex, our Office of Management and Budget Director, we heard from the tax collector yesterday, as you all had known. We followed up with the tax collector as well. We're going to be working with the tax collector on his projections. One thing I just wanted to make sure the board understood, and I think you were getting there, well, I already know you got there yesterday, but just to let you know that we do budget excess fees that the tax collector gives to us. So that's why we've done projections for the next 3 to 5 years as well. So I will, and Mr. Jex and Lori Bailey Brown will work with his office to ensure we can get those projections from him and that we keep that updated. Last year, we got $4.4 million from the tax collector in excess fees. Years past, what I have seen, we've only gotten $2 to $3 million, depending, on the year. So it's a significant amount that we get. So I just wanted to ensure the board knew that, the discussion yesterday, you were going in that direction, so I just wanted to make that clarification to you that we do budget that from year to year.
Madam Chair, if I may.
Yes, Commissioner Delory.
Mr. Gray, you may want to get with the, I guess, the budget folks. I don't know what you call the department now.
Office of Management Budget.
Because it's been as high as 7 to 8.
Okay.
Yeah. So you may want to go back a number of years to find out that trend.
Okay.
That's all I'm saying.
No, I appreciate that.
Prior to the previous tax collector.
Yeah.
Prior.
The prior.
The prior.
Just want to make sure we're fully vetted.
Thank you. Yeah, I would definitely do that.
I call it
What your names are anymore.
pre-collision and post-collision.
I'll go ahead and turn it over to Mr. Jackson. He will follow up with the rest of the constitutional officers.
Thank you. For the record, I'm Timothy Jex with the Office of Management and Budget, and the number that Darren referenced is from the prior 4 years. It doesn't go back to the years prior where we had been receiving $4 to $7 million from the tax collector. So today's work session is not as much about a presentation as it is a discussion on the materials that were provided. So everyone should have the supplemental work session constitutional officer follow-up package. It's 56 pages. We also provided 2 additional reports this morning that were received after we had submitted the information. So I'm going to switch over and just sort of show some of the reports that were provided on the screen. The front page has sort of a table of content. We did our best to capture all the requests that came out of the...
Hello?
For real?
I think this is wrong.
Is it scam?
Are they selling solar?
My apologies. We've never had this happen before.
We're getting a grant? Are we getting a grant for employees that we have?
I think she'd like to hear without our commentary.
So you've reached the Board of County Commissioners. So it's definitely.
You can't set this up.
Oh, dear Lord.
Now she's holding the cards.
Have a wonderful day.
Andrea's having quite a conversation. Good work. Good work.
We are nothing if not customer service.
That's right. That's right. Awesome. Apologies, Mr. Jex.
Thank you. So we're going slightly out of order of the package, but on page 21, we'll start with the property appraiser. They provided 8 pages of budget detail to back up their request. So I think we'll just kind of pause with each of the sections and see if there's any questions.
Would you give us the page number again, Tim?
Page 21. The primary additional information provided was on page 28 and 29. That gives really good detail in terms of what their budget increase was and what makes up the increase.
It's 21. What do you want?
Back of the book. So we probably need some calibration, Tim. This is in the back of the binder, continuation of where we were yesterday. In follow-up constitutional officers, that's the tab.
That's correct.
Thank you.
There's 2 21s.
I think each constitutional has theirs numbered, so
To the back of the
She'll
book.
follow up.
Hold on one second, we'll get it.
Yeah, I'm on page 21. It's page, I just passed it. There's 21.
Yeah, we go to 20.
I got it.
Okay.
Apologize, yes. Last tab.
Yeah, that's fine.
So what tripped me up was that the page number is in the center bottom of the page, so the middle ring binder, if you have it on paper, might be through the page number. So that's a little hiccup.
So the property appraiser's FY24 request was a 6.9% increase. There weren't a lot of individual questions aside from the direction to have all of the constitutional officers provide their budget detail, which they did. They followed up and provided additional information.
I have no further questions.
I have none.
Anything else, Will?
I'm good.
I'll go ahead and move to the next item on the agenda, which was the sheriff's budget. The sheriff's budget was provided prior to the meeting. It's a 55-page document. It includes all the personnel and operating expenditures for their programs. It's all of the detail that they're able to provide. They have certain items that they're not able to provide, but they did provide an in-depth budget detail going into this process.
Any questions for Tim on that? No, thank you. We can move to the next one.
The next request is on page 30. This is related to the clerk's finance request. So this is separate from their Article 5 request. They did provide additional detail that backed up the request that they had originally submitted. So clerk's finance request is a 7.1% increase. That's adopted to adopted from 4.8 to 5.17 million. And they did provide, we provided them with a template, and they did a fair job of putting the information together, showing each line item, what the variance is, and what the overall percentage is.
And what is the increase adopted with the BAR? Is the BAR calculated and adopted to adopted?
So you see where it says total budget in bold on the screen? You have to look on the screen here. So this was provided at the last work session. Below that line, the double line, you see the amended percent increase. This analysis does include the $969,000 Article 5 request. I'd have to calculate if you wanted to go over the amended. But basically, you see the percentages of the amended budgets below, but we do intend, typically, our process is to go adopted to adopted, and that is the second line. So this year, it would be a 7.1% increase over last year's adopted. It would be lower if you compared it to the $4,929,000 amended FY23 budget.
So make sure I'm understanding what we're saying is that if you were to have included those BARs in that number, the total increase would be less.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, that's correct.
Percentage, yes.
Yeah, we think the fair way to present the information is adopted to adopted.
That's fine.
As you, when you add the amended budget each year, it shows a smaller increase to the following year.
And I believe that was, I know, Commissioner Herr, I know you were, that's what, you wanted to assure that we were comparing apples to apples.
Correct.
And so that's, yeah, so that's what we're showing on the screen.
My puzzled look is because I am not completely convinced I can see these screens,
Yeah.
but where's 7.9 on that screen?
It's
7.1, I'm sorry.
Oh, there we go.
The second line, yeah.
That was the puzzle look. All right,
And I apologize, I should have had this in your packet from last time, but
So the amendments in the budget, the BARs are being identified, but not in the apples-to-apples comparison. They are being tracked separately. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's
Yes.
correct.
Okay.
The clerk's original budget request, they often do show the amended budget and then the new year's request, and they compare it to the amended. So that was the comment that had come up last year, or last meeting.
And the recent BAR that was done with the clerk's office is, if you look to that third line where it says amendments and go all the way over to the right under fiscal year 23, that's that 93,000. And that's what the amended budget would be, that 4.9 that it totals to. And that's where Mr. Jex has captured that. But to compare the adopted budget, that was approved this year versus the one that he has, the clerk has requested next year. That's the top line. That's at 7.1%.
Any other questions? Any other follow-up? Okay, thank you very much.
Yep. So the next item on the agenda is the Supervisor of Elections. Their information starts on page 2. They also provided budget detail backup as requested, as well as a few other reports that came out of the discussion. So we'll go through it. I know the Supervisor of Elections here to answer any questions. He might be better to explain some of the, especially some of the backup information provided at the presentation.
And real quick, Tim, I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. What page are you on?
Page 2.
Okay. Does it, everyone have it? Okay.
Give me a minute.
Yeah, I'm tracking it electronic, so mine's a little different. I've got it both ways.
Got it.
Great, thank you.
Yep. So the first slide is his original budget request, SE01, and then the next page includes the backup detail, which is an additional 7 pages of budget detail, including staffing. It's a breakout, FY23 compared to FY24. That was one of the requests to show that variance. They provided line item detail, and they broke out the elections from the core budget request.
Questions for Mr. Jacks or anything, any follow-up?
I've got some questions for the supervisor, if he'd be so willing to come down and answer some questions.
All right, Mr. Anderson?
Yes.
Good afternoon. Please bear with me. I'm in a severe amount of pain right now. I have an emergency doctor's appointment for my eyes, so please, if I can't look up at you, that's why. So go ahead, Commissioner.
Understood. Hopefully I can get to the bottom of it for you, and I appreciate you being here.
Absolutely.
So I've got quite a few questions, and this is a follow-up to a conversation that you and I had, which was a follow-up that you had with me after the last budget meeting. And so I just want to lay the groundwork. You produced all these documents, correct, or your office?
That's correct.
And you personally have reviewed them?
I have, well, there are documents in there that were provided to you, I believe, from the county staff as well. I'm not sure what page number they are, but it talks about
Right, so let me ask this. Maybe, I understand, maybe...
That is the slide.
Okay.
PowerPoint.
And the backup documentation you all provided here in the last few days as well. So some of these questions came out in the last, and I'm not so sure I still have an understanding, and I truly do want to understand your budget. I have the utmost interest, as I feel my fellow commissioners do, that we want to have efficient and we want to have accurate elections, and we want you to have the appropriate tools to make that happen. And so some of the materials you supplied us, if we look back at the costs and increases over the years, it looks like to me, if we go back to fiscal year 19 and we move forward to fiscal year 24, it's almost 100% increase in the budget. And I'm not sure I'm tracking and following why. We had the whole discussion about, the presidential years, off years, so on and so forth. And I don't know of another budget in this county that is escalated at that rate. And so I've looked at all the FTEs, I've looked at, the capital. I'm just trying to understand. It looks like in presidential years, there's been an uptick, which I understand. In off years, there's been some downtick historically, but no downtick since fiscal year 22 moving forward. And yet I look at the FTE, so I'm just trying to understand, how do we get there over that period of time?
Well, I'd have to ask how you got to the 100%. I don't understand your math on that, so I need to
Well, let's just
explain in
take the
detail how
numbers.
you got there.
Let's just take the numbers. Fiscal year 2018 was $2,515,558. Fiscal year '24 is $5,680,733. Fiscal year 19 was $2,815,000. It's a pretty good increase. I mean, if you take what the fiscal '24 is proposed to be at $5.6 million, half of that's 2.7, 2.65. And
2.8.
so I'm just trying to track that, and then I look at the FTEs that were provided, and I try to follow that and track that, thinking, well, okay, we've got a lot more employees perhaps, which does not really seem to be the case. In fiscal year 2018, there were 16 employees. Proposed for '24 is 23 employees, which is 7 more employees, but it's gone up to 23 in fiscal year '23. But if I run the numbers on FTEs per voters, it just doesn't add up. And I'm looking at page 96, FTE versus registered voters. By example, in 2019, there was appears to be 1 FTE for every 19,000 voters. In 2020, there's 1 per 20,000. And then we get all the way to '24, and there appears to be 1 per 16,000. So I don't know that it's necessarily in the FTEs, and that's what I'm trying to track.
Well, okay, so to give some context to the conversation, you thought that during my budget presentation this year that I was asking the county for more FTEs, to which I explained to you that was not the case. The budget that was submitted asked for nothing additional to the core of the office, no additional FTEs, no additional capital outlay. So that's the context of the message. You were a bit confused on that, and I was able to address that. Additionally, let's go back to 2018. You bought new voting equipment in 2017, which brought about massive amounts of maintenance and licensing fees that you didn't have prior to. You had an AccuVote system that was decertified, and it was also maintained in-house with our senior technician. So when you purchased that, that caused the budget to increase significantly. And then in 2019, we actually bought about 14 to 15 more DS200s, which also came with more maintenance and licensing fees. Then you don't want to forget that we added about 32,000 voters between 2018 and 2020. There was approximately registered voters of 303,000 registered voters, and by the time we got to book closing in the general election, as I told you in 2019 when I presented, I forecasted that we'd be between 335,000 to 350,000 voters, to which I was on the mark because the book closing numbers for the 2020 general election was 335. So when you have that massive amount of an increase in registered voters, that's also going to increase your budget. However, you have to be careful about 2020. 2020 was an anomaly year. If you look at the paper that was provided to you by your own staff, it shows that we returned about $453,000 to you, and the reason why is because that was from grant funds that were given to us based on COVID. So those numbers could be a bit skewed. I'm not sure. Like I said, I don't know how you added and how you carried the one on that. So I'd have to take a further look at how you do that, and we can sit down and have that discussion. Also, I explained to you that and to the board, that there were improvements that needed to be made to the office. We had a pay increase, to which we mirrored what was done here with the county. We also had to make some other changes. We're a little bit stifled in that area because we are in need of more space. So again, I don't know how you got to those numbers, but my understanding of our conversation that we had is that you were confused about whether or not we were increasing our FTEs, to which we were not, and I addressed that for you in that conversation, so.
Okay, so let me be clear. I don't have much confusion, and I'm pretty good at running finances. So
I'm using your words, Commissioner, not mine. That's what you told
I
me.
see no direct nexus to your service, to your equipment. I see no direct nexus to your software that rises to the level of the type of increase that you're asking for. And the FTEs, simply that discussion is historically what's been utilized to represent, based on your statements, that we've had all these additional voters come in, and I understand that. But if you run the numbers based on employees versus voters, it just don't cut the mustard.
Well,
From 18
again,
all the way to
Commissioner, I don't know
24.
how you're running the numbers. I mean, we're having a discussion based on your math, and I don't know what your math is.
Okay.
I would have appreciated it that you and I addressed this prior to this meeting, but be that as it may, I think what we need to do is sit down and take a look at how you are getting to that number. I can't speak to that right now.
Sure, and just for the record, I'm using the numbers and documents that you and your office supplied.
Again, I don't know how you got to that number of 100%. That seems very convenient in my opinion, but okay.
Commissioner Herr has a question if you, I'm sure we'll
Sure,
have.
go ahead.
Is that okay?
Sure.
So the slide that's up here,
This report was provided by our office, and these numbers are correct from our financial system. The FY24 request is $5,680,000. I think Commissioner Zimbauer referenced FY19. The adopted transfer to the SOE was $2,815,000. So that's the approximately 100% increase the Commissioner mentioned.
and so the basis for these are actually out of the record keeping that comes from the reporting that comes from Mr. Anderson's office into our financial system. Is that an accurate statement?
These are the approved transfers from the general fund to the supervisor of
To the
elections.
So this is actually a cash-out-based system.
And then Mr. Anderson mentioned the excess fee returns. Those are shown on the bottom line.
So if we, to get to Mr. Anderson's point of view here, I think, is that he's looking at fees net of the returns, which is a fair way to look at it. And if I look at 2019, it's $2.6 million. And now 2024, we're at $5.6 million. If I estimate that you're going to return something of an average of the last 3 years, that's roughly $300,000. I'll go $400,000. I'll use your highest number at $465,000, and I'll do rough math and subtract it by 5. I get to $5.1 million versus the $2.6 million. That's how we got to a 100% increase.
Yeah, but again, the 2018 election cycle was 2 elections, and in the presidential year, you have 3 elections. You have 4 countywide mailers that will take place next year. That's all your sample ballots of 346,605 voters. You have a countywide mailer of voter information cards, which are all statutorial. I'm not going to get into the details of this today. I'm simply going to ask the board to just point out to me where you'd like me to make the cut so we can move forward, because there are things that will need to be done next year, and unfortunately, if you don't fund those, then that means that there's going to be some violations. So I can't, I'm not going to get into the ins and outs of that today. These discussions, this stuff was never brought to my attention prior to this. This seems a bit of an ambush here, but be that as it may, that I don't see that 100% as being a very accurate statement or numbers that are given without the proper context. That's going to require much more detailed discussion than what we'll get to today.
So from a context perspective, if you could roll the bottom of the screen up a little bit. I think the bottom gets to the election year cycle, the presidential election year cycle. So change from prior election year cycle. And this is only looking at 16, 20, 24. And so the comparison there is that if I look at 16 to 24, we're looking at, call it 2.6 million compared to the 5.1 million. I've netted out, Chris, that's not the number on the screen, but I'm subtracting 500,000, assuming that there would be revenue back at some point, so that's actually lowering it. And the 2020 was about $1.2 million net of the return of the $465,000. It was $1.2 million over the starting point of $2.6 million. It was a 50% jump from 16 to 20, and again, a huge jump, 45% jump on top of the original jump to get to the 5.6 million, which is how we're getting to this high number. So the issue isn't the math. I guess the piece of it that I think you've made a wonderful offer here, and that is that you'd like us to take it away and figure out what should be cut, and I think that's probably a fair request. And maybe we look at this from a line item perspective. I would have hoped we wouldn't have to do that, but I think we probably do.
Any other questions or comments, commissioners?
The only comment I would make is that we ask the county manager to work with the SOE's office and try to figure out, I mean, again, all of us want to make sure that we have fair and effective and efficient elections.
And compliant.
That's correct.
We don't expect you to be out of compliance with whatever
That's right.
regulations need to happen.
And you know, I take exception for any statement that would say,
Agreed.
tell me what you want to cut and we'll face the consequences later.
Well, I think that's the bottom line.
Well, and if that is, Mr. Anderson, I hope that you'll vet that process out with the county
There's no need to raise your
manager
voice.
and get to the bottom of it. Again, that would be my recommendation, and bring it back to us, and let's truly understand it. I mean,
I can follow up with him.
yeah, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Commissioner Constantine?
Not at this point.
Okay. Anyone else?
Good.
I would concur with Commissioner Herr and Commissioner Zembauer that it's probably appropriate at this point that we do a line item review.
Sure.
All right, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hope you feel better,
Yes,
Chris.
hope you feel better.
All right, so the next item on the agenda would be a discussion on the Article 5 request from the clerk. 1 second.
And just, we're back to the presentation, Tim?
Yes.
Okay.
There is addition, I think you should stay with your packets. There's additional information.
Don't stray from the packet.
Straight from the packet.
He's our guy.
Which page are we on now?
So
284, beginning of that section.
we've,
Got it.
for FY24, the county received a funding request from the clerk for $969,718 from our Article 5 fund. This is coming at a time when the revenues in the Article 5 fund are falling. We had peaked at around $1.2 million. The current year, we're projecting $460,000, and next year we have a $500,000 budget. Traditionally, we fund judicial, public defender, and state attorney out of these funds. It's a $2 fee that goes into a segregated fund, nothing else, no other revenues go in there aside from a small amount of interest. And over the years, we have had a couple of years where we had to use general funds to supplement. FY24, we're projecting to need $1.8 million in general funds to supplement. So there's a Florida statute 29.008, which talks about county court technology, court facilities and technology, and then the requirements. And we have been working with Desmond Morrell from the county attorney's office, James Garuzos from our IT department, to sort of review that and determine what the appropriateness is for the funding. Our stance is that this is really a request for general funds. Whether it's funded through the $2 fee or funded through the general fund, it's requiring general funds to cover. So we did poll our surrounding agencies. Orange, Brevard, Osceola, and Lake do not provide $2 fee revenue to their clerk. Volusia County does provide $2 fee revenue. There's 67 counties, and you'll find that a lot of these agencies do things differently. When talking with the county attorney's office, we do believe that these costs are technology related, therefore they would be eligible under Article 5. The question comes down to whether they're reasonable and necessary. That's sort of the opinion that Desmond provided in his memo. And the question then would be, if we are going to use general funds to pay for this, what sort of oversight would be required on our end? We have a process where technology requests go to our Information Services Department, regardless of whether it's water utilities, fire fund, all technology requests go through our IT department for review before they come to the budget office, and then they're reviewed with the county manager for appropriateness and approval. So we haven't really got into what that process might look like if we were going to start incorporating these requests, but that's kind of where staff had landed. The clerk is here, I believe, to discuss some of the information they provided, a line item detail with the request. We've had meetings with their staff to talk about, what it is that they're trying to accomplish. So I think I'll leave it at that.
And if you will, just a few comments on that. And I had a conversation with the clerk a week or two ago, and my recommendation after reviewing it to the board was not to use our $2 for the clerk's technology. That, however, I know he may or may need that depending on the project. He could, but we would meet in the middle that he could actually submit a project through the process like any other department would go through that review. So he would have his $2 or $1.90 to handle, his technology. Our $2 specific, goes to the state attorney, public defender, judicial. If he has requests outside of that he can fund, that he would put it through the process like we would have any of our departments do. Have our technology folks review it. We had talked about it today. Actually, the clerk and I have a meeting coming up this week. One of the things I was going to offer was that maybe we come with like an oversight group, including the clerk's office, our office, judicial, any other folks that could, need to review, so then we can provide all the information to the board that you all need and make a decision based on the need.
Any questions for the county manager? Mr. Zembauer? And Commissioner Delary?
Have we, and maybe this is a better question for Tim, I'm not sure, but there was a discussion about these trust funds. Is that better for Tim to answer that?
Or Ms. Bailey Brown, she's been working on this. Or one of.
So can you give us an overview of the trust funds that exist and what they're intended to do and what purpose they serve, as well as what controls are in place there?
Yes, sir. There's the Clerk's Court Technology Fund, where his $2 or $1.90, after the 10 cents is remitted to the state, is maintained for clerk court technology. There's also a Records Modernization Trust Fund, which are other fees outside of the $2 that are deposited there. The clerk did provide a 5-year history of how those funds have been accumulating, which actually showed they've existed longer than the 5 years. There was some spend down in the last 5 years. You may have noticed in that detail. He also supplied a 5-year forecast of how he plans to spend down those funds in the future.
To one trust fund? Is there only one trust fund?
There are 2 trust funds.
Okay. And what is the total of the 2 trust funds?
Approximately $11 million.
Okay. And the 2 trust funds are for the same intent?
One is for court technology of the
Right.
clerk. The other is records modernization.
Okay.
And are they split about evenly?
They are about even. One has a little more than the other.
Any additional questions or follow-up?
Not at this time.
You had a question for Mr. Gray?
Yes.
Mr. Gray, have we spoken to the judicial system or the state attorney or anybody else?
I had, since the the May 16th budget work session with them, I have not. I don't know if, have you? Tim?
We did receive additional budget detail, which was provided, but we did not talk to them about this request.
Yeah,
Okay,
So
so we have
no.
no input from them yet.
correct.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? Does the clerk want to come forward or bring any members of his team for any questions? Do you all have questions for the clerk?
I think I do have a question for the clerk, if Grant, you would be so willing.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
And these go to the trust funds, and I know and I appreciate the follow-up that we had in my office. And the conversation we had was somewhere around $3.2 million, and the majority of that had been spent down in one of these trust funds. I wasn't aware that there were two trust funds there. Did I miss that in the conversation?
No, the 3.2 was a different trust fund. When I first got elected, there were 3 trust funds.
Okay.
And one was called the 10% fund, and the state eliminated that.
Right.
And that's when I entered office, as you saw the pictures on the tape drive backups and the serious technology deficits we had. It was a stressful point because we were, by law, only allowed to spend about $690,000 out of the $3 million. So I was able to go through with the CCOC and get an extension to use it the next year. Now, part of the reason that we built some of these up, as we've spoke before, was the dearth of technology there. It just didn't exist.
Sure.
And so that's what happened. And each year we spend, when we talk about these fees, we all have the same problem here. You're looking at your revenues, and we've talked about this, Commissioner. I mean, the state needs to adjust the fee schedule or come up with a different method of funding these technology needs because they are growing. I have a stack of the mandates, if you want to see them back here. It's about this tall. And it's constantly becoming more and more work. Even this morning at a police chief meeting, they were discussing the effect of Marcy's Law on records redaction on their side. Vito talked about adding another person to their staff just to redact things. And that's just on their side. And then they got the body cams and have to redact body cams. So on our side, we get hit with all these mandates as well.
Sure.
So the revenue's dropping, as you saw in your numbers. And when your numbers drop, our numbers drop. In the past, we've funded this not only with the $1.90, but we've taken the excess fees we've had to replenish trust funds and fund the needs.
Sure.
But the reason I particularly bring this to your attention this year is to alert you to this problem. The state hasn't helped us out with additional tools. These are the mandates we have to follow so far. This is my CIO, Tony Landry. He's here to answer any technical questions.
Understood.
So we're spending more than we bring in fees.
Sure. So
now, and then the point comes, if you look at the law, it does, it's pretty clear there's responsibility
Sure.
on counties for court technology, and the chief judge echoed that. I know that the sheriff supports a lot of these projects, like the e-warrant project we want to work on them with. But after a while, you just run out of tools and resources available to keep making the progress we're making.
Sure, understood. So I just want to be clear. If I'm following the numbers of the two trust funds, which is the 102 and 103, I think Tim referred to and as documented, projected in '24, one of them would be at 1.1 million. The other will be right about 5 million, if the projections hold correct. And I think I'm hearing that the third has been completely spent down, which was approximately $3.2 million. And I agree, the state should revisit the fee schedule. And I'd have no problem standing side by side with you at the state and arguing that. But I don't know that I could do that with a straight face if we're sitting on $6 million in trust funds that aren't spent yet. If I'm a decision maker in Tallahassee, I'm going to look at it and go, well, you've got some technology money still sitting there that hasn't been spent, and I applaud you for what you've done since you've come in, because I got to tell you, I think everybody understands the technology you've brought to bear on that office has been tremendous, and it's much more efficient than it ever was. And so I think that's all good work. You know, I think for me, I would like to see the county manager work with the clerk. And look, I'm pro-technology, and if the state is not funding to the level of service that the state has an expectation of, then we need to have that discussion. If we or the courts or the partners feel they see a benefit with better technology or more technology that's not mandated by the state, I feel better having some discussion with the clerk and the partners and of a project that you would bring to us for us to decide, okay, we feel we can build some efficiencies with the courts and X, Y, and Z, and the return on investment is going to be 2 to 1. If you will fund this technology, you'll see a benefit here. I think that's a better way to do it.
Sure.
But I think we also, in agreement with the clerk, we should be monitoring the Article 5, and maybe that's a legislative priority we need to consider having in the upcoming session of, look, you're throwing more of the burden on us locally, and, you know, here we are.
Right.
So,
And Chairman, I point out on the 2 trust funds we have, the records modernization can't be used for salaries. There's limitations on that. The core technology one is the one that takes the biggest hit. And like I said, we've replenished it with some, and actually, you know, it's somewhat ironic being criticized for saving money, because when we've been, that's the only place I can save it, right?
Right.
So to keep these trust funds consistent for the expenses of IT that come up on a refresh when we have to replace servers, and we do at some point need to address our case maintenance system, which could be multi-million dollars of cost, and I think it's more prudent to try to take care of something like that on our side than me come to you, blow through my trust funds and come to you in a couple of years and say, hey, I need, you know, $3 or $4 million for a new case maintenance system or something like that. So
Right.
I would take somewhat of exception. We are trying to do as fiscally responsible as we
Sure.
can on our side.
understood.
But the bottom line is we're all in the same problem. Article 5 doesn't cover the cost of court technology
Right.
in Seminole County, and how do you, there's only 2 ways to do it. You can go to the county to get some additional help.
Right.
Or get the fee schedule change, which it's like going to a McDonald's and asking them to charge you the price 15 years ago. You know,
Right.
nobody does that, but our fee schedule is the same as it was 15 years ago.
Sure.
And inflation is really killing our ability to provide services.
Okay. But you're okay working with our staff and try to find solutions to
We-
all this?
We could submit projects on a case-by-case business thing. Do you have any thoughts, Tony? Tony's the one that's been spearheading up all these innovations.
As requested from the meeting that we had last week, we did provide a list by project, and I think that was distributed but didn't make it as part of the presentation. Oh, it did make it as part of the presentation.
Tony, that
Fine print, but
that information was distributed this morning, so you should have it at your
Yeah,
desks.
we just got it.
we got it today.
So this sheet, from a cost standpoint, replaces the salary sheet that we had previously submitted in the budget. And this enumerates the projects that we were looking to accomplish for 23-24 in conjunction with our criminal justice partners. Some of these, well, all of these have a significant ROI on them when you include all of the savings that you would have throughout all of the different agencies, criminal justice agencies in Seminole County. Some of them are public safety issues. For example, the e-warrant system can be directly tied to public safety. This is a project that is promoted by the Clerk's Warrants Division, it'll decrease the amount of time that it takes to create a warrant to submit to a judge, and for a judge to sign the warrant, and for the warrant to get back to the clerk.
Right, we spoke about that in our meeting. Yes, understood.
And
Are they not electronic now?
They are to some degree. It has to become paper before it gets to the clerk's office, and the deputy sheriff can't create the warrant in the field right now. So there is a process for the judge's signature to get on a warrant electronically, but it's not a timely electronic process. This new warrant system would make it electronic from end to end.
So
And
what's the delay? From the time a sheriff officer decides that they're going to write up a warrant, the time the judge signs it, what's the,
I asked the same question.
You would probably have to get with the Sheriff's Warrants Division on that. I know that there's at least a day delay before it gets to the clerk's office. I don't know how long of a delay it is between when the deputy needs it and when they can submit it to the judge, and when the judge will actually recognize that it's available for signature. I know that
that's a
there's some-
follow-up item that we need, because, I mean, I can only speak from my experience that from the time a phone call comes in to the time it gets signed is not very long
Okay.
when somebody's on weekend duty, so it facilitates on weekend duty. So that's worthy of exploring a little further.
I think regardless, the existing e-warrant system that was invented in the early 2000s is not very well supported by court administrator. They no longer have the source code for that, from my understanding. They're trying to keep it going with duct tape and Band-Aids, and they're hoping that it lasts until we put something in its place. So
That's a totally different issue. But I appreciate you sharing that.
Commissioner Zembauer?
But all of the other projects.
Commissioner Zembauer has the floor to ask another question.
Excuse me?
Commissioner Zembauer has the
I'm
floor to
sorry.
ask
Yeah,
another
thank you.
question.
I think, when I've looked through that list, which we got today, and I tried to go through it as quick as I could, and I did have a follow-up with Grant and his staff, and I appreciate that very much, because it was last minute, my schedule was full, I had a cancellation, I was able to reach out, and we were able to get to everybody together. I think that a lot of this is great technology. I think this could build a lot of efficiencies, but I think there's more partners than just the clerk's office that need to weigh in on this, the court system, the sheriff's office, and it gets back to the same thing with the state. If the state is funding, let's say, a Chevrolet, and the state believes that a Chevrolet will perform to the level that they expect, if we want a Cadillac, then we have to decide, do we want to pay for a Cadillac outside what the state's paying? Now, if the state is paying for or expecting a Chevrolet and they're funding a Volkswagen, well, then we have that conversation. I'm happy to support that conversation. I think it gets back to working with the clerk's office through our county management and all those stakeholders to say, if the judges are banging on the table saying, we need this warrant thing, it's not efficient, then we should know that. If there's other things that they're not being successful with, we need to understand that, so we can communicate that to the state.
Right.
It's a different conversation to say, hey, we could get this in half the time,
Right.
and it would benefit us this way. Public safety could be improved if we did X, and the cost of that is X.
Right.
And I'm all for that, if we have that conversation, but I just can't blindly go, let's go off on a technology whim that, arguably may make things more efficient, but the ROI is not there, or is it really being asked for by the partners?
Right. Okay.
Just my thoughts.
I have a question, unless somebody else has something they'd like to jump in. Based on the research and some of the reading I've done and information that's been provided from the county attorney's office, it appears that the infrastructure sales tax could be utilized for some of the things that the clerk is requesting. Could we get an opinion, have you all look at the request? I know technology is certainly something that the infrastructure sales tax can support. If you all could let us know.
Sure, absolutely.
That'd be helpful. Any other questions for the clerk?
I don't have a question, but I'll weigh in and say that I concur with Commissioner Zembauer's assessment, and also say that I still think and I think this may come out of that process that you just described, but the question still resides in my head of buy or build. And that is a discussion that happens in every business every day, and we've not done, you all may have done that analysis, but we're not privy to that analysis. And that's the struggle that I have with all of this, is that we are certainly not the only judicial system in the country, and most of them, I'm going to guess that some of them buy and some of them build, and I'd like to understand that side of it a little bit better. The disappearance of source code is a really good reason to buy software as a service.
Yeah.
And so I really would like to understand that a little bit better.
Agreed. I would hope that would come out of that discussion.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
That's the reason why I asked earlier if we had any conversation with the judicial or state attorney, and I want to make sure we're having full dialogue. to
Sure.
see
We put them in the
if
fold.
what we're doing meets their needs. I'm sure it does, but I'd like to have confirmation.
Sure, absolutely.
Mr. Applegate would like to weigh in?
Yeah, I think this is going to be my last comment at an official meeting.
We thought the last comment was the last
You better
comment.
appreciate this. But as a member of the bar, I can tell you that I hear it all the time, and I've seen it, that the lawyers in this community are very appreciative that Grant has taken the clerk's office out of the 15th century and moved it into the 21st century. The clerk's office has done an amazing job. So just wanted to say that.
Well, I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Appreciate
I
it.
think everyone agrees with that. We're just trying to figure out the best way to fund it.
I agree to that.
Yeah, for sure.
And I would pass that on to Tony and his team. I mean, when they came on board, I said, make this Google-ish, and just gave them the goals and the support, and they've really done a bang-up job. We're the envy throughout the state on a lot of issues. And some other counties are currently looking at our e-certification system as well to use that technology in their counties. So we're pretty proud of that.
Maybe you can package it up and sell it.
Yeah, that's right.
It has sign it
That would
written
be a
all
nice.
over it.
That'd be cool.
There's vendors that do it, but we.
Right.
Mr. Gray?
Yeah, and I like this, the way it's going, the process, and in fact, we just had a short discussion that the clerk and I had a couple of weeks ago. We actually have just checked our meeting is tomorrow morning. I have a monthly meeting scheduled with the clerk on a monthly basis, just so I can understand everything too, and making sure that both sides are working cooperatively and we're getting information. I love this idea as well, is that not only gets our staff and our IT folks involved to review and look and collaborate, but also getting the other judicial partners involved as well.
Essential.
And then we talked about, as we go through this, if there's prioritization, we can bring that back, to the board, maybe even phase some of the projects that we have. But, and I think Commissioner Zimmer, you and I even talked about, it may be that we bring something mid-year or something, and because we won't, because I know we're starting this budget process happens once a year. However, there's things that we could be working on all year, and there may be some opportunities for us to come back mid-year, as well.
Agreed.
So we'll start working on that right away as well.
And I would just like to thank the county attorney's office for doing the research on the Article 5 and bringing us all up to speed. It's been a question that I think is well answered now, that we have clarity there, and also the clerk for raising. I know the clerk has raised this issue probably, I think, as long as I've been here. He's been telling me, hey, sooner or later, the money's going to run out. The state's not funding to the level that, and I think now we know. Now we understand it, and that's good work. And I think that's something, as a commissioner, maybe in training, we should have a financial training, including Article 5, because left to our own devices, we may not understand it all.
Yeah.
Right.
This is where you plug FAC, Commissioner Constantine.
Right.
No, I was just going to say, of the 160 legislators, I think 149 probably don't understand Article 5 either.
Understood.
That makes me feel good.
Commissioner Herr.
So I also think at the point that you all are working together on this, that this document that's up on the screen needs to be prioritized for sure, but there also needs to be some demarcation of whether a project is something that is for an existing service that has to be either upgraded or improved, or maintained, or for a new service that's being contemplated, because I do notice that there's a new service on here that we actually haven't voted on yet. So it was exploratory in nature.
Right.
Agreed.
And so I think there's got to be further clarification as we're working through this.
And it should be a living document,
Yep.
in all honesty. It really should.
Right, right.
Any other questions for the clerk? Any other
Tony
comments?
had a comment, and I had one too.
There's a delineation between new projects and existing projects that might not be intuitive on this sheet. The projects that have no implementation cost are the ones that are existing. Those have already been done. Those have maintenance, ongoing annual maintenance costs. So that's how you can tell the difference between the ones that have already been done and need to continue to be maintained and the ones that haven't been done yet.
Yeah, see, so that would throw me off as well. I think that it needs to be, because you already have e-warrants, but there's an implementation cost, so
Yeah, there's an implementation
that would be
cost.
an entirely new e-warrants. That's the type of clarification that needs to be on here. And we don't read code really well, so delineating it clearly for the general public would be helpful.
Especially in number 2 font.
Yeah, this is quite the struggle up here, just so you know. We're not squinting because we don't like it. We're squinting because I think they're testing us.
11 by 17, 11 by 17.
And that will all come out, as we say, with this
Yeah.
committee and review,
Yeah.
so I
That'd be great.
appreciate that.
Any other questions related to the clerk?
The only other thing that I wanted to point out, I'm sorry, is that these projects were not started or completed in a vacuum. For example, e-subpoenas was requested by the state attorney and the sheriff. E-warrants is a project that's requested by the sheriff. The judicial workflow portal, that's ICMS, what the judges use for the judicial viewer, that was requested by court administration and the chief judge. So we're not doing these things in a vacuum.
And when Mr. Gray and his team get a chance to pull everyone together, I'm sure we'll be able to denote that. There may be even some color coding involved, but we'll definitely be sure we capture all of that.
Real quick, Madam Chair, if I may explore that for just 1 second, because I think that goes to what we just were talking about. On that point, those partners who made those requests, then that would assume that that's not a state expectation that it existed. If our partners are saying, hey, we need this, either we weren't supplying it because the state says we need to, or the state has no expectation, and this is a benefit, an option.
Okay.
So in other words, if it's something that the sheriff is requesting, maybe it should be in the sheriff's budget and something that he's asking for. Is that what you're saying? And not necessarily be the onus of the clerk?
I think the clerk really is going to be the air traffic controller for a lot of those interactions.
Okay.
But I think what I'm wondering, what I've just heard is, if the chief judge asks for X and the sheriff asks for Z, then it obviously didn't exist. So was it mandated by the state and we didn't do it? Or was it something they were asking for from the standpoint of, hey, this would be great if we had this, it'd make our life a lot easier, your life a lot easier, more efficient, more streamlined? Is that it, or we just never supplied it and the state expects us to supply it?
I can tell you what I know about the existing projects here, and that's when Grant took office, there was an e-subpoena electronic data transfer, but it didn't include electronic signatures. It didn't include an interface for the sheriff. So the system, the base system was already there. What was asked for was upgrades to make the system more efficient.
Okay.
And that brings those return on investments you're talking about,
Sure.
too, because we wouldn't be able to survive without these
Understand, but-
technology improvements.
Were the upgrades that were asked for, are they mandated by the state, or it's just a business decision to make a more efficient process?
It's both. There are two driving factors to that.
Okay.
One is the business process to become more efficient in some cases, but one of the big driving factors is security, because security has become much more sensitive because of all of
So
the
again, I
problems.
think this is back to, I think we got to figure all that out.
Usually when we get a mandate from the state, there is no benefit to our office. It's something new we have to do.
You feel the same way?
Yeah.
Grant.
Right on.
It's constant on that. And the other thing I'm just going to point out just about the long term, because the way I'm looking at this, and I preach it to the state legislators and everybody, is, you're basing an important process of criminal justice and courts. To me, as you look at the history of counties, they were established to do roads and justice systems. That was a core foundation, and we've kind of grown from there. But to base this upon fees, which may or may not come in based on the interest rates and the economy, but also as we build out recording fees, there's only so much capacity with the extra requirements too. And I was looking just at the dock stamps we remit to the state. Last year we remitted about $77.5 million, which is about $6.5 million a month goes to the state, and this year we've been averaging about $3.6 million a month. So this is a substantial slowdown in the real estate market and those fees, and it's just, to me, it's not a good way. If you're going to set up, how do you fund a court system and justice system, setting it on fees, which may or may not come in, is not the most stable way to do it.
Well, I think we
Agreed.
find ourselves in a prime position with a pro-law enforcement legislature in Tallahassee right now and a pro-criminal justice legislature, that this would be the prime time to have that discussion.
Agreed. Anything else? All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Malloy.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else that, I know Commissioner Constantine had some comments that he wanted to hold. The only thing we have left, and I have some wrap-up comments as well, the only thing that we have left is to review the budget calendar and then board comments and public comments, unless you have something else, Mr. Gray.
I was just going to
Okay.
talk about the next step, too, so that's fine.
Okay. Commissioner Constantine, did you want to?
I'm going to save those questions for, I have some questions that I want to have Tim and just bring them back. I'm fine right now.
Okay. Anyone else with wrap-up comments?
I've got some wrap-up comment. I'll be brief as I can.
That's all right. Mine may or may not be brief.
I just want to take a moment and thank Lori and Tim for all their work. And of course, Darren, Forged in Fire, arrives here 90 days ago, give or take, and he's picked this up. But I will tell you, since I've arrived, this is, in my opinion, has been one of the most engaging and informative budget sessions I think I've been a part of. Learning the Article 5 and actually understanding the direct nexus of how that works is a benefit. And I think at the end of the day, I think this is going to make for better budgeting and have that conversation with our partners to truly understand. Because I'm not convinced even all of our partners wouldn't understand completely Article 5 and how we can work together. If the state is not funding appropriately, then together we can have that conversation that may be beneficial to all of us. So thank all of you for making that happen this year. We sincerely appreciate it. I know it was extra work, but I think we now set a pretty good baseline for that Article 5 discussion moving forward. Thank you.
Great. I'll echo the congratulations and the thanks. You all have done a tremendous job. Our constitutional budgets are some of the more tedious and tense conversations that we have, right? Because all of our department budgets, we've got one back to pat and one throat to choke right here. And we all work together constantly, and we have policies and procedures in place that we are all very familiar with, and there's a comfort, and we can still ask some pretty tough questions of our team, and we do. With our constitutionals, I find that it is different. It is more tedious because each of them have been elected by the voters, as we have been elected by the voters, to run their operation. And we have to be respectful of that, certainly. But there is also a fiduciary responsibility on this board for those budgets. And without going into too much detail, so I don't want to give Mr. Applegate a heart attack, we can't ignore what has happened in this county in recent years. And because different constitutional officers do operate differently, and there is not the same checks and balances in their operations, just as a function of how they operate, their procurement practices and requirements are different. They don't have to go out to bid for certain things like we have to. There isn't the competition that exists in their procurement processes. There's a lack of clarity, particularly with the tax collector, on who is responsible for that budget. And with that lack of clarity comes opportunities like what has happened in this county in the past. And all of us, at one point in time, have had citizens point to us and say, why didn't you step up? Why didn't you step in? Why didn't you ask the tough questions? If DOR isn't going to do it, and the man who drove up to Tallahassee and pounded on the table at DOR and said, someone please help us, there is clearly a gap there. And so we recognize that there's a gap.
Right.
It's our responsibility, I believe, since we recognize it, to ask as many questions as we possibly can on behalf of the taxpayers of this community. And it may step on some toes, and it may hurt some feelings. It may really make some people mad. And frankly, I'm okay with that. We can't ignore that that we have a responsibility. And I appreciate very much the fact, I don't want to speak on anyone's behalf, but I do feel like it needed to be said because of some of the interactions earlier today. Anyone going back and watching the interaction with the supervisor of elections would be able, the tension in the room, you could cut the air with a knife, for those of you who are in the room. So I think it's worth addressing, and I think it's worth getting out on the table and out in the open that there's no room for hurt feelings with millions and millions and millions of taxpayer dollars. And I'm good with that. Commissioner Herr?
I think the other piece that is probably worth adding on to that is the fact that I think we have an exceptionally collaborative spirit in this county, not only with the constitutionals, but with the cities and the school district, et cetera. And that applies to budget as well. So I do fully appreciate that the constitutional officers, not all of them have big operations. They're small. Somebody may be doing budget on the corner of their desk while they're doing another responsibility. But our team is always available to help. And the one thing that I would say that our team, it's not the one thing, so let me rephrase that, but one of the things that you all are superb at is explaining things to the five of us. And so when things get tense and can't be explained easily, this team is here to help with that and to provide transparency to the taxpayers whose money we are managing. And so that offer has existed forever. I hope that everyone feels that open door, because the door is open. But I agree, we have to ask the questions, as unpleasant as it may seem. And quite honestly, we've asked the questions to everyone. It just so happens that some of them are a little more public than others. So it is an interesting dilemma.
Commissioner Delary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would echo all our sentiments, especially yours and Commissioner Herr and Commissioner Zimbauer. I think you're spot on. We do have a collaborative spirit here in this county. And one thing that's always impressed me about this county was that people are willing to pick up the phone. People are willing to come to our office. People, like we call it, walking the third floor. And I encourage everyone to do that on a regular basis. I know the clerk's done it, sheriff's done it, supervisor of elections also done it. But sometimes you need to walk the third floor a couple of times. And what may seem simple to one person may be complicated to another. But the real issue, as you pointed out, Madam Chair, was that we are trying to be as transparent as possible, and we are trying to understand each other's budgets as well as everybody's needs, because the dollar can only be spent one time, and it's not our money. That's the bottom line. I know we all share that, and I think those are very wise things that we're all saying up here, and I appreciate everyone's comments, including the staff's, because there's many times that I've had staff in my office multiple times, asking me and telling me and educating us and me. It's important that we all do that on a regular basis because education is the key, transparency is also the key. So I wanted to thank everyone for that. Ms. Lori Brown, not too sure what your department's called, even though I've been told a couple times so far. I know it's changed names, but I think yourself, Tim, and your staff has done a phenomenal job. I also know that the new county manager, Mr. Gray, being here a short period of time, has done a phenomenal job.
Thank you.
As well as Ms. Johnson, who did a lot of this last year with Mr. Applegate, and I wanted to thank Mr. Applegate for his hard work last year as well. There's a lot of hard work that goes behind the scenes that people don't see, and we're constantly being informed by information and being educated, so I want to thank you all for that. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Commissioner Constantine.
You know, I think the sentiments that my fellow commissioners have expressed certainly resonate, and I would hope that everybody, you know, at the Constitutionals also appreciate it. It's not a problem, but it's a challenge, and the challenge is that the money that is allocated all comes from the same pool. And although some groups can go appeal their budget directly to the governor, some folks can go to the DOR. The fact of the matter is that when the Constitutionals, you know, ask for money, it's very seldom that we actually have the responsibility to take it away. That's not our job. Our job is to question and to engage and to try to find ways to improve and cooperate. But it also means, and one of the things that the Office of Resource Management, is it? Wow, I got it right. The Office of Resource Management has done in the past and shown us is that over the years, you know, our percentage continues to go down. Our percentage meaning the percentage that the county commission's responsible for in dealing with the basic services that everybody thinks about in county government. That percentage constantly has been going down while the constitutional officers have gone up. And when someone goes to Commissioner Lockhart or Commissioner Herr or myself and asks, why aren't you doing this? It's hard for them to understand and appreciate that the big budget that they see, we're only getting about 35% of. And when Mr. Zimbauer, Commissioner Zimbauer points out that a certain constitutional officer has doubled in 5 years, it's not a question of it, you know, they should take exception to that. It should be, let's figure out how we can do things better. Also, the understanding that the dollars that we bring in, including the sales tax dollars from the referendum, are money that then can be diverted away from some, you know, that is paying for expenses that if not there, most of it, if not all of it, would have to be put into the general revenue. So it would be taking away from other areas. So just like we understand and appreciate and hope that folks understand that we're all in this together, the constitutionals should also be of the same ilk and appreciate the fact that the monies that are being brought in, then processed and then appropriated, are monies that, if not there, they're not there for all of us. And is it about 65%?
That's
right?
correct, 65.
65% of whatever isn't there for the constitutionals. So again, we like to say that we're collaborative, we like to say we work together, and that is true. But I think all of us need to understand that, that it is our responsibility to take the big picture look at the budget. And as we do that, I think it's important to make everyone appreciate the fact that whatever they're taking in their budget, or whatever they're asking for in their budget, the increases mean less for other services that in some other particular area. And I like the fact that we get into the details. I appreciate it. I think that talking about collaborative nature, I think I appreciate more the active participation of a collaborative, which would include, as we talked about Article 5, find ways to share in the resources that we can, where we can work out with all groups. So I'll leave it there.
Any other comments?
I think there's I just have a couple more comments on the to-do list before you wrap up. I want to make sure we don't lose track of Article 5 on the legislative priorities.
Right, we have that.
I also, I think it would be extremely beneficial for us to understand other counties' supervisor of elections run-up in budget for that same time period, because it will very clearly just pop out that if these are legislative requirements, it should just pop right off the page and we should stop all this. And so maybe that's the easy button here, because I don't think we've asked for that in the past.
You haven't, go ahead.
On that same Article 5, although the county attorney's office has done great work on the Article 5, said there's some indirect costs impacting us that were not looked into, and I think, Brian, you and I have talked about that before, which has to do with some of the state's responsibility of funding expert witnesses and so forth under the due process fee, and we should be looking at that and understanding, and I think that's going to be part of the legislative conversation once we get there. But at the end of the day, I think that's going to be a long discussion, because as Commissioner Constantine indicated, being in Tallahassee, and when I've spoke to several of them, they have no idea what you're talking about. None. I mean, they have no idea, what are you talking about? What does that mean? What is it for? And you point them to the statute, and maybe they read it and go, oh, I never knew that before. But to the point of, my expectation is if there are something that impacts us or our partners, from a legislative standpoint, simple answer, just tell us that. Just tell us. I'm not cut from the cloth of just because I say so, you should do this, because it is our ultimate responsibility to make those tough decisions. I'm all about fairness. I'm all about funding the right level. But I would feel remiss if I did not have an explanation and backup to that information to face the constituents and go, why did you do this? So I think we're all pretty much on the same page, and that's great during this process. So again, thank you.
There was another finger that went up, another hand. Did I see one? No?
Good.
Okay. There are some additional follow-up questions that I have related to the supervisor elections submittal. I think since the org chart was submitted, there have been some changes in staffing, and so we need to have that updated. I'd also like to have a better idea of how those salaries are spread between he has executive salary, which I'm assuming is his salary, split out, but then there is another regular salaries and wages. I'd like to have a better idea of how that's broken down.
Sure.
I think again, the elephant in the room and the constitutional officer that is the only one that has said, well, you figure it out if you don't like it. It is going to take some time, effort, and energy to dig into that and make sure that we're really aware. And the reality is, when Commissioner Zembauer and I were first elected, and it was our first budget cycle, and the supervisor had just been appointed as the supervisor of elections, we had an opportunity for the first time to interact with him in that budget process. And there were some things that we questioned, like spending quite a bit of money on rebranding and on some items.
Right.
And so when things like that have happened in the past, it continues to cause me to want to make sure that I really understand.
Right.
So if it has been put out to say, well, then you figure it out, then we'll figure it out. I just want to make sure we're clear that this isn't because of something that's different necessarily, except that it's prior performance. Yes, Mr. Applegate?
On that point, and I was going to say it earlier, but now that you touched upon it, under the law, as you know, unless you're arbitrary and capricious, a court's not going to overturn your decision. If a constitutional officer truly feels, when you make a statement that, well, if something happens, it's your fault, that constitutional officer, if he believes or she believes that the budget does not meet the requirements of his duties or her duties, then there's an obligation to go to court and say, Your Honor, we need to have this looked at. And I'm sure most lawyers will look at case law and find out that 99 out of 100 times the court's going to rule in favor of the legislative body, absent truly arbitrary and capricious. So,
Commissioner Constantine?
Madam Chair, I think that we've all basically, in one form or another, have asked the county manager to continue to work with all the constitutional officers on their budget to find, ways that, we can work together, reevaluate them. Does that necessarily need a motion at this time, or is that something that I'm really looking at the two of you. Do you need that, or is that something that you can do on your own?
Absolutely. I have the direction. That was going to be in part of my follow-up as well, so.
Fine.
All right. Are we ready to talk about the calendar at this point?
Yes.
All right.
Well, just one comment, since we're all making comments.
Yes.
Throughout my career of this profession, I will tell you, and I started my career in the budget office. They know this. I've told the story. The most important, I guess, issue that you deal with or a document that you approve is the annual budget every year.
Sure. Absolutely.
Because, right, it sets the board's priorities. It tells the community what you want more of, what you want less of. Nothing, as we know, can be done. The services to the residents or business owners of this community, nothing can be done without being funded, having a budget. So to me, I was very honored to start there, and I got some great advice when I was in college to do that. I wasn't a finance guy, but I got a great advice, and it truly is, at my 28-plus years doing this stuff, it's the most important thing I believe the board does every year. And having a staff like Tim Jex and Lori Bailey Brown, running, coming into this job, and knowing what I know enough to be dangerous, but coming into this job, top-notch, probably it's the best that I have worked with in my career. Thank you to Tricia to help guide me through all as well. But all these directors, we have a Class A team here. You all had told me that when I went through this process, and the last 90 days that I have been here, I cannot thank this board enough for this opportunity, but can't thank them enough for what they have provided me. So without the work that they do every day, I couldn't be up here doing that. So that said, so next steps, of course, my friend here, Brian, who didn't tell me he was retiring until I got my contract signed. So that was a whole other issue. But I wish you the best as well, Brian. Next steps, as you know, so we are wrapping this up. I will follow up with the questions that you all had given to me today and yesterday as well. We want, with the SOE, with the clerk, we'll get that going. There may be some tweaks later that we do, but I could bring those to you. We can always amend the budget, as we go forward. We just want to ensure it's right. I will deliver you my recommended budget to the board in the next couple of weeks in mid-July. That's what we're looking at. From there, we will set the trim, the millage rate, on the last meeting in July, July 25th, at a board meeting. That will be an afternoon meeting that we'll have that day. Our first budget public hearing is on September the 12th, and then the final public hearing and adoption of it is on September the 26th. When I talk about looking forward, as I had mentioned yesterday, the state of the parks system, I'm doing that deep dive in that, so that will be coming back to you in the fall, which we may want to tweak a little bit budget-wise, but we'll look at that, as well as that operational review of public works, and in particular our facilities in our county. We have started that. Christian Swenson has started that. I'm going to bring that back to the board in the fall as well, so you get a good state of our facilities. As well as the project schedule, the projects that we've shown, the shiny list that the chairman had mentioned, I will be following back up with the board too in the next couple of months too, to show you where we are on those and what the plan as we see it going forward, and then get the direction and recommendation for the board on prioritization and how you want to move forward on those. And then each of you have asked for some additional follow-up items that I will get with you individually on, and whatever I provide to each one of you, I'll provide to the whole board, so you do have that. When we talk about the process already for next year, I know we're not finished with this one. As we talked about, I want to start in January with the board to do an economic outlook. Maybe even bring in a professional, like a Sean Snaith or something from UCF, or someone, an expert, to really show us what the year looks like, and then for us then to set the budget guidelines, not only with our departments but our constitutionals. As I've started talking with them, I just want to ensure that whatever guidelines that we're putting out and to our departments, that we're putting it out to them as well. So I know they're individual offices, but I believe having that communication and cooperation with them in the beginning and they see the big picture will definitely help the whole process with that. And with that, that's all my comments. Thank you.
Cannot work in a vacuum.
Right.
Are there any members of the public who have submitted comment forms, or anyone here who would like to address the board? All right, I don't see any. With that, we'll adjourn at 2:30.
Yep.